Our society has been evolving to go toward streaming TV services rather than watching traditional cable TV. Like, remember bundled packages? A lot of Americans are moving away from triple play packages. Like, I used to have Verizon triple play that had the TV plus the internet plus the home phone. And I've moved away from that and just have access to some streaming services. And I'm sure a lot of people out there have done the same of cutting the cord. And as much as that's the prevailing trend of a lot of people shifting away from traditional TV to basically streaming TV, we don't know what's exactly going to pan out and which businesses will succeed and which won't. We know that there are some like Netflix that are the strong streamers of our time, and they've been the first mover in the streaming space. And you're listening to the Investing Mastermind Podcast. I'm Michelle Markey.
And I'm Signe Lundholt.
So the question that we're asking today is, who's going to win in the streaming wars? Will it continue to be entities like Netflix, or would others like Paramount or Warner Brothers Discovery figure out a way to crack the streaming business? Because the stock market is currently rewarding some, like Netflix and Disney, but they're punishing others like Comcast and Paramount. And it's kind of a bloodbath for a lot of streamers, as well as Roku is really down. So what do you think about this space, Sina, as far as how some of the streamers are doing? And is the stock market getting it right? Or what do you think is happening here?
Well, I think it's just, another gold rush right now. What we're seeing, in my opinion, it's like, when Metro Express came out and there was a lot of these free newspapers. Like at the time I lived in Copenhagen, and there was free newspapers on every street corner. Somebody would give you a free newspaper. And it's sort of the same now. The big hit, it's streaming services. And what we can see is every little niche got their own streaming service, from sports to cartoons. And what I think is going to happen is that we're going to see, some will definitely prevail and some will never see those again. And that's exactly what is happening right now, is that it's a new kind of area. It's an area where a lot of the established companies within this media space are trying to test out some things and trying to launch their streaming service. But what we can see is that they're also learning that, maybe we should collaborate on certain things. And I can see that, there's a new sports channel or streaming service coming out where several competitors are actually coming together, like Disney, Warner Brothers, some of those, to actually launch a sports service, a sports streaming service, so that people can watch sports. And it's interesting to actually see that competitors come together to do that, also because sports, it's just very expensive, to pay the fees to actually show the games. Maybe we're going to see more of that. We're also going to see some of the companies that might actually not going to be able to go through this, but it is super complex. And I also think that it's such a new area that for investors is something that we really need to be careful about moving into, streaming, because we haven't really seen yet who is it that's going to win, what is it that they need in their business model, and who is not. But we can certainly look towards Netflix and see some interesting things with that company and how they've been able to actually pivot from sending out DVDs, and now they're a streaming service. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think about the streaming landscape right now, Michelle?
From the little bit I've done research about, like, I've learned a little bit, but I wouldn't say I have the most competence yet in streaming. But some of the general things I've observed is Netflix was the entity to beat. Like, they've got probably around 50% market share, and everybody else has portions of the remaining 50% of market share. So it's pretty hard to unseat Netflix. But even the mighty Netflix has had to turn toward advertising. Other groups like Roku had been really good at advertising, and that was a big part of their business model. And yet, what I started observing is that I think a lot of people who were going to buy smart TVs, they already have it. And if the smart TV is built in with some of that Roku technology and they were able to extract some advertising out of that, they've sort of extracted that already. I'm not sure how much more a group like Roku can grow. And there was talk before of what if Netflix buys out Roku? I don't know if that's still a possibility, but I don't see a lot of upward mobility for a company like Roku that's just the intermediary or like the hardware of some of the streamers. Whereas an entity like Netflix can give you advertisements on their platform, and the same with Disney or Amazon Prime. They're all starting to introduce some advertising because that's a way to try to stem the losses that a lot of streamers are facing. So they need extra revenue coming in to be able to just make ends meet, it feels like. So some of that seems to be in play. And there's some talk of consolidation of group like Paramount is merging with Skydance. So they've been talking about how Paramount's going to buy Skydance in a $5 billion deal. I don't really know what that means, but it kind of seems like some of these traditional legacy media players like a Paramount or Warner Brothers, they need to get creative if they don't want to keep having losses in the streaming business, because there are some profits to be had. And fortunately for some of those groups, they have a rich content library. Like I know the Discovery is a big brand of lots of promising content. And so it makes you wonder, how can you break the mold of the traditional revenue streams that you used to have with doing the, say, the bundled cable packages, and you now need to evolve? And it kind of feels like we're going to see bundling again, like you just mentioned with the sports packages, but it's just going to now be in these streamers kind of making some deals. And I think I heard also about how Disney is maybe consolidating Hulu, like it's just going to be folded into the Disney Plus app, maybe. So if that's true, we will see a consolidation, just like maybe once upon a time, there was the big three TV providers like NBC and CBS and ABC. And now we'll see that maybe again, maybe we'll eventually just have a top 3 to 5 streamers, and instead of a dozen that are trying to jockey for market share.
Yeah, exactly. And when I look, and I know it's just my own family, but my kids and my husband, they actually don't really watch a lot of streaming services. What they look at is YouTube. They watch YouTube when they have to relax. They open YouTube, and my kids watch some gamer go through a game, and my husband will look at also some videos to kind of relax, where I'm like, I don't even understand why they're watching this. This is crazy. I don't get it. So I'm also thinking, is it going to change the consumption of TV, what we watch? Back in the day, there was like a program, and you needed the news around dinner time or right after dinner. And there was like a 8 o'clock TV show that would, gather the family in front of the TV, and everybody would talk about the next day. And where we don't see some of those game shows anymore. It's just not a thing. And we don't get news on any of these streaming services. That's what we need to find online. So yeah, I just think our behavior is changing rapidly, and these streaming services need to really get up there and understand human behavior and all the trends. It's honestly also, it's not an area necessarily I know much about. I know a lot about content. Content is definitely, I come from having done a lot of content throughout a lot of years. So I think the content space is incredibly interesting. What's happening right there also with AI. You mentioned Discovery having a library, nature movies. And what's interesting is that they can produce content, and it's going to be very cheap to produce. They can use content from that was filmed in the 90s. An elephant didn't change. If there's a video of an elephant, it really didn't change. Maybe the knowledge we have of elephants have changed then, and you can do a speak on the most recent knowledge we have about elephants. But for them, to produce a nature program, they can just look in their archive and take some of those things out. And what we also see is some companies that have some IPs, and they have the permission to actually use that intellectual property, those kinds of brands, in producing content. So even though we have AI, what they could do with AI is they could produce, like, for example, Harry Potter, an AI generated show on Harry Potter, and do that much cheaper than they were able to do with before, because they have the license for that, like Warner Brothers, for example. So in that space, I really do think within content, it's a really interesting business, because I think we're going to see some really interesting things on how you can create cheap content. People don't really want to use a lot of money right now on streaming services. They don't want a wide range, but content-wise, what's being served to the people and looking into companies that produce that content, that own some of the IPs, I think that's an interesting area to look into right now.
Yeah, and that's a great point of how that could change the business of media and entertainment, this notion of AI. And I think that's part of why there was such a big Hollywood strike of a lot of people for a while. They're afraid that AI is going to take a lot of their jobs, like voice acting and replacing a lot of animation artwork, let's say. There's a lot that could potentially be at stake, and there's the good and bad, obviously. So part of the challenge in a lot of these streaming businesses is partially it's expensive to run, so they need subscribers. But if you don't have enough paying subscribers, it's hard to fund getting new content, and you need to work for a long time, many years, to gather a content library that a lot of people will want to come back to. And potentially AI could disrupt that if AI makes it easier to get content that people will want to come back to. So it's a bit of an interesting dynamic of how Netflix is kind of licensing a lot of old shows like Seinfeld or other shows a lot of people love watching, and they've yet to come up with enough of their own content that people won't just want to watch once. Like maybe they watch it one time and then they're like, okay, time to move on. I never want to watch that again. So a lot of these content providers, they need to come up with something that has staying power. Like a lot of people love watching a lot of Disney movies, like their children watch it a million times. And that has a lot of staying power. And it could be why Disney as a streamer is starting to gain some steam. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily cash flow positive. So if we want to evaluate whether a given company in the streaming business is doing well or not, we want to see if they're going to become cash flow positive or not. And that was something that Netflix for a long time had struggled to be. And maybe they're on the precipice of having cracked that. I'm not sure if they will sustain cash flow positivity because it feels like a lot of the stock market had judged them on whether they were adding subscribers or not. So even though that's a potential metric you could evaluate, but I don't know if it's the only metric that you should judge if this is a good company to invest in or not. So it's sort of interesting how perhaps with the advent of AI, that could make or break some companies. Maybe it will be a huge boost to this content library that a lot of the streamers need to have, or there could be something else that comes along that could disrupt things. So it's like you said, it's a very fast-paced changing environment, and I haven't really invested that much into this space. I'm very curious to see what will happen, but I'm kind of not yet sure what's going to happen to a lot of the streamers. Like even Apple TV, is that going to be something that has staying power, or will that get rolled up into something else? Because Apple has made some forays into other business ventures that may or may not have worked out. So it's like, definitely tricky even for a very strong brand like an Apple. Can they maintain momentum with Apple TV, or will that eventually get bought out if someone else in the streaming business is stronger than Apple is, and Apple's like, whatever, we're going to focus on something else. Who knows?
Yeah, and I just think the streaming space for us that really don't want to lose money. So rule number one, don't lose money. And rule number two, never forget rule number one is what Warren Buffett says. And for us who are operating by that, I think that for streaming services, they still need to kind of sort out what is our business model? How do we earn money? How do we generate cash from sales? It's still capital intensive. So they still need to do some experiments. They still need to do some innovation to figure out, okay, how do we actually make money? And we don't know which company is the winner within the streaming space right now. So for me, it would be something where I would definitely step away from streaming. Content is another thing where I have more of a circle of competence, where I do also believe that there are some really interesting things and where, there potentially could be some winners. But in terms of streaming services, my recommendation is, if you're a Buffett style investor, is to maybe step back, let this settle, let them figure out what is our business model, how can we earn money on this, and over time we'll be able to then identify which company does the best job on generating cash in the end. So yeah, that's my opinion.
Yeah. So clearly, from what Sina and I have been talking about, it's a wild west in terms of who will win the streaming wars. And there's a lot of opportunity because you can see there's so much competition. But other than Netflix, like I kind of kicked myself for a couple of years ago when there was the start of the Ukraine war, and I saw Netflix losing subscribers because they cut off Russia. And back then, the stock of Netflix had tumbled, and I was rushing to try to figure out the business model. And I saw other famous investors like Bill Ackman jump into Netflix at around 350 a share. And I had the chance to maybe buy it at around $170 a share. And it's roared way back up since that time in 2022. And I kicked myself for not investing when I had the chance. But at the same time, I wasn't sure if I truly understood Netflix. So maybe it's for the best that I didn't invest, even though I've lost out on potential gains because I didn't yet get to fully strengthen what I learned about Netflix and whether they truly have a good business model or not. Like I said, they might be starting to crack the code of what it takes to be cash flow positive, but that was one of the reasons why Bill Ackman and Pershing Square Capital had sold out of Netflix, is because he didn't know what the future may hold. And he tries to be sort of like a Buffett style investor. He tries to have a concentrated portfolio, and he has a lot of controversial moves he's done. So I'm not saying that we should necessarily follow what Bill Ackman does, but when he invested in Netflix at first, that gave me and other investors a clue as to, is this something I should look into? And I felt it was a very compelling potential opportunity back then. I just feel like I missed out, but it's okay because maybe I don't fully understand what's happening in the streaming and content business enough to make a firm decision when it came to Netflix. And we just have to live with it. Like, I can't predict what's going to happen with Netflix. While they are the most popular streaming business out there, time will tell if they really have figured it out and if they're going to continue to be the ones to lead the rest of the pack. So definitely an interesting space to stay tuned to and see what develops. And in the meantime, at least we can just keep building on our knowledge. And just like Warren Buffett has done, he has gathered a lot of knowledge on businesses over many years. And the reason why he's able to make such a concrete decision on some stock and you're like, wow, he just bought such and such, is because he's been learning about it all along for many years. So it's not like he just woke up one day and he's like, oh, this stock is being hyped up, let me go buy some. He knows very well what he's been invested in. So in a similar way, we can keep that in mind for our own potential investments of someday, as long as we've kept tabs and we understand the business, maybe we see something change and a light bulb goes off and we suddenly have an epiphany of, I think AI is going to do this in content. And I think this company is the most prepared and their business model will benefit. And let's say they get a lot of advertising revenue as a result. That could be one clue to get you to see this pattern play out in the annual and quarterly reports. And then you make a decision of, yes, from my research and understanding of this business, I will invest in this one. So something like that is a way that we could go about it. What do you think, Sina?
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a super important thing to definitely read the annual reports, try to understand the business. There's books that's been written about streaming that you could also, look into in order to actually understand this. But I do think it's very complex. That's definitely something to keep in mind for now, to maybe be a little careful about streaming.
So yeah, that's a great thing to end off with. So yeah, keep learning and stay open to the future disruptions and innovations in the streaming services area. So with that, we'll see you on Tuesday.
Till next time. If you enjoyed the show and found the content informational, we would be super grateful if you would leave us a review and follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you automatically get new episodes in your feed. We publish a new show every Tuesday.
The contents of the Investing Mastermind podcast are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. None of this is investing advice, and if you need help in your personal situation, please consult with a professional.